Thank you. Okay, Adam, you're right. Everybody have a good webinar.
Thank you, Mara. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today on curb and parking management. My name is Adam Levine, and I'm the Executive Director here at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, or NYMTC. If you've joined us at one of the 5 previous forums, we appreciate the very helpful input you've provided, and we look forward to hearing more from you. If you're new, thank you for joining today's conversation. Whether you're new here or a previous attendee, we are eager to hear your thoughts, opinions, and experiences on this topic that is getting an increasing amount of attention in communities both here in the NYMTC region and across the country. Today's session is the latest in a series of outreach efforts that are part of Moving Forward 2055, our regional transportation plan that is charting the course for transportation decisions in the NYMTC region over the next 30 years. These outreach efforts have included pop-up events across New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley, as well as a website survey that has provided thousands of comments. Our series of focus groups has also contributed valuable feedback for the development of Moving Forward 2055, and now we are focusing on individual topics in our series of forums, including the recent discussions touched on above in the areas of freight, active transportation, human services transportation, safety and micromobility, and alternative energy. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Brooks, who will guide us through our format today. Stephanie?
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Today's meeting is being recorded. I think you heard that as the meeting began. We're going to be doing some online polling. So I'll be putting a link in the chat shortly to access our Poll Everywhere site. It's a real-time polling software that you can use to answer questions. This is how we're getting feedback. You can always also answer questions in our chat, in the chat function. This workshop is also available for AICP credits for anyone who is looking for those 1.5, and that will also be in the chat towards the end of the meeting. We also will be able to see your comments and poll responses in the back end, so they will be recorded as well. I think most of you know WebEx, but you can click the little chat button to see the chat window and then type your comments there. If there's anything that you want to add in response to our poll questions. And then for today's meeting, we're going to just start with a brief introduction about NYMTC, little bit of overview of how to use the Poll Everywhere platform. We'll do a few interactive activities just to get you familiar with the software and do any sort of troubleshooting people might have. We'll have our speakers talk about curb management trends across the country and in the NYMTC region. And throughout, we will be offering opportunities for you to answer some poll questions and just get your thoughts and feedback. And again, any questions in the chat that you might have. And then I'll put a link at the end about getting your AICP credit. So I'm going to introduce Jerry Bogaz to talk us over about NYMTC. Thanks. Take it over, Jerry.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie, and welcome everyone again. Today's session is very much an interactive session, but we do want to give you some context about how this all fits into how federal money comes into our region for transportation improvements. NYMTC is an organization that's at the center of that process. It's the Metropolitan Planning Organization for New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. And as you can see from this slide, we have various points in our mission. We serve as a collaborative forum. We produce sound technical analysis for our member agencies to use. We bring them together and work with them on a shared regional vision. And importantly, we all work together to capture the maximum amount of federal funds available so that we can do transportation improvements in our region. Next slide. So what's important to know, and some of you do know this and others don't, that NYMTC is a council. It's made up of member agencies. We are staff to this council, we who work for NYMTC, but the council is the member agencies. And so this slide shows those members. On the upper left, we have the 5 suburban county executives, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam to the north, Nassau and Suffolk to the east. On the upper right, we have the 2 New York City members, the Director of the Department of City Planning and the Commissioner of Transportation in New York City. And then, of course, the Commissioner of Transportation for New York State and the Chief Executive Officer of the MTA. Below all that, we have our 7 advisory members, including the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, our sister MPO across the river, New Jersey Transit, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, as well as the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and 3 federal three federal oversight agencies, 2 in USDOT, the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and the US EPA. Taken together, this is the 16-member NYMTC Council. Next slide. And this is the region that we cover. Again, 5 boroughs of New York City, 5 suburban counties, total of 10 counties. Next slide. So the Regional Transportation Plan is really a foundational part of the metropolitan planning process that we're required to follow to bring federal dollars into our region. It's updated every 4 years, so quite literally, when we finish one, we take a little breather and then begin work on the next one. Currently, moving forward, 2055 is being developed for adoption in September of 2025. Usually these plans are required to have a minimum 20-year planning horizon. Ours tend to be longer than that. For moving forward 2055, it'll be 29 years. They contain both long-range and short-range strategies and actions, and even some projects. It's important to note that we're not just looking at the horizon year of 2055, but really the period of time between now and then. And all projects and strategies in the plan are considered for a financial plan that's required that shows what activities, what projects, what programs, what strategies can fit within a financial envelope in the long term. Next slide. Our members have been developing a framework for moving forward 2055, built around 6 vision goals. You see the areas of those goals here. The goal statements themselves are a little more complicated than this, but these are the buckets that they fall into: safety and security, infrastructure, resiliency, congestion, land use, and transportation equity. And that is the strategic framework that is being developed for the plan, and the plan will be built around this strategic framework. Next slide. So now Stephanie's going to come back and talk to you about how to use Poll Everywhere. We'll practice a little bit, and then we'll get into the meat of this session. So thank you all again for attending.
Thanks, Jerry. So you'll see in the chat a link to pollev.com/NYMTC. You can use that link in the chat to access the poll. If you're having, when you click on WebEx, sometimes it makes you confirm to leave WebEx and go to that site. You click confirm. You can always just type in pollev.com/NYMTC, and you'll be prompted to enter a name if you choose. You can remain anonymous, and then click continue, and you will enter the poll. And so you'll just respond to questions and prompts using the poll software and whatever browser you have. And if you're on your phone, you can use your phone. If you use Chrome, Firefox, Safari, whatever browser you're using today. So our first question is interactive. Oh, people are already putting in. Great. So the question is, where are we coming from today? So we want to see where people are in the NYMTC region. We have a few people outside the region so far. We have Rockland, we have someone in Manhattan, a few folks in Nassau. I'll give this about maybe like half a minute just to get people familiar with the platform. You can always change it if you accidentally put a different location. You can switch to change to another location to be more accurate of where you're coming from. So we've got pretty good representation already, I see here. Got another person in Manhattan, another person in Rockland. Great. And it could also be groups of people rather than one. So we've got 10 responses already. Thanks everyone for participating. See Lower Manhattan of Queens. Great. So we've got, it's always nice to see the excellent representation throughout the NYMTC regions. Many thanks for everyone for responding. Westchester, excellent. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds. We've already got 15 locations, so this is excellent. Really appreciate everyone's feedback. Great. 5 more seconds. We've got 15 folks. And all right, Lower in Nassau. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next slide. This is a question more about what type of organization you might be representing today. So are you representing a federal, state, local government? Are you representing a private citizen? Are you consultant, professional association, or other? If we haven't listed that here, if you can respond into the chat. let us know what type of organization you're representing. Always nice to see a diverse view of perspectives. So we have government, private citizen, consulting team, public transportation agency, great. We've also added trucking or railroad because that sort of feedback is always very interesting in terms of parking management. Community advocacy group, we get those quite often. So I'll give this another 30 seconds or so to see the type of feedback people are giving and where they're coming from. Thanks everyone for your feedback. Oh, great. Another public transportation agency, wonderful. Like I say, all of this information will be stored in the back end of Poll Everywhere. So whatever you say, if something doesn't show up on the screen immediately, it won't be lost. It is getting recorded. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Because we have a good amount of information to share with you today and questions to ask. So the type of community do you reside in? Is it urban? Is it suburban? Is it more exurban and rural? We have, you know, in Suffolk County and up in Putnam, we have some rural communities. So if you come from one of those communities, do let us know. So we have almost 50-50 urban and suburban right now. It's another 10 seconds or so. All right. Thank you all for your feedback. So on the next slide, we have a question about your top of mind concerns. Now, this is an open-ended poll. We're going to have a few of these today. Open-ended means you can just type in your thoughts and you can type in as many answers as you want. You just press enter and your response will show up on the screen. Sometimes it takes a little while, so we're going to give it a, you know, maybe a minute or so. Just what are you thinking about today? What brought you here? What are your top concerns? What are your interests? And we just want to start hearing from you about your thoughts about this issue, about the topic of today's session. So again, just type it in, press enter, and it will hopefully will show up. There we go. Safety and ADA accessibility. Great, thank you. Important topic. EV charging infrastructure, congestion pricing, and bike lanes. All right, how to balance parking management with business needs. Yeah, we will be discussing many of these things. A big concern today is the proliferation of mobile Amazon delivery warehouses jamming up New York City streets. Having had to go behind a lot of Amazon trucks in my neighborhood, I definitely appreciate that. Less double parking, better delivery zones, curbside pricing, excellent. Better enforcement and compliance with curb regulations. Wonderful, thank you. We are going to be discussing almost all of these things. Double parking, yep. And again, keep this feedback coming. If we move on and there's something you wanted to mention, please just drop it in the chat. And we'll be reading those out as well. Residential parking programs, increase in government programming for non-vehicle use of public streets. Excellent. Maximum versus minimum parking requirements. Okay, thank you so much. This is excellent feedback. Okay, so we've got a sense of the things that you're thinking about. So we're going to move on now, and I'm going to introduce David Von Stroh, who will be talking about curb and parking management in the NYMTC region. Thanks for being here, everybody. Take it away, David.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the introduction, Stephanie, and good to be with all of you. Excited to introduce this topic and gather more feedback from all of you attending today. So yeah, my name is David Von Stroh with Cambridge Systematics. I work in curb and parking management with a few cities around the country. I'm actually based in Seattle, Washington, and we're doing a project there funded by the US DOT SMART grant program. And we're also doing a similar program in Los Angeles, which my colleague Sam Zienheimer, who's on the call today and will help with part of the presentation, is leading as well. So we bring some experience there, and we'll have some examples from other places as well. So just this topic of curb and parking management, certainly, we want to first just tee off kind of how it relates back to the goals of the moving forward plan. So certainly it can impact the safety on the streets. When you reduce conflicts between different modes, whether they're passenger cars, delivery cars, trucks, bikes, transit. I saw in the responses there a lot of people talking about double parking, illegal parking, and some of these things which can cause those conflicts, whether it just causes traffic congestion or some unsafe near misses and things. And then in terms of just ensuring equitable, appropriate use of the curb so that all of us can move most efficiently, both goods and people movement. And then, there are some things that, people brought up about whether congestion pricing, parking pricing, demand-based. So that's are things that we'll talk about a little bit as well. So you move to the next slide here. Yeah, so this slide and the next one present some graphics just to kind of highlight some of what, when we talk about curb management, what we're referring to. So it's, that space right alongside the sidewalk in the right of way where cars are parking. Sometimes there may be a bike share station. Sometimes there's maybe a street cafe parklet. That's become a more common thing since the pandemic, especially. Transit stops as well, bike lanes, a lot of different uses. And what we want to highlight is that this is, on the street, the curb, which parking is one use of. I saw one of the responses that mentioned maximum parking requirements and so on. So I think that's probably, out of that list of responses, maybe the one thing that we won't touch on as much, because that gets into more of the land use requirements. So we're really just kind of focusing on the movement of people and goods and the use in the right of way of the street. It's kind of what we're focusing on. We are, towards the end of the presentation, we are talking about off-street parking and how that relates, because there's some similar concepts, whether you're in a lot or a garage off the street as well too. But yeah, we want to acknowledge that this is a valuable asset to communities. It can be a place of revenue generation for communities in terms of parking fees, citations, and so on. And it's valuable to local businesses, to residents, quality of life, and many goals. So if you want to move to the next slide here. So yeah, some of the important trends that we're seeing, certainly there's been a boom in e-commerce in the last number of years, as we were all staying at home during the pandemic, especially as all these different e-commerce sites allow us to order those things, whether it's a parcel, whether it's a food delivery from some of the gig services, and those are uses of the curb. And certainly we're looking at electric vehicle charging coming up. I saw that in the responses as well. Whether it's for our vehicles in terms of taxis or some of the TNCs, or even bike usage, whether it's a bike share or just a personal bike. Stormwater management, you want to keep those drains clear, otherwise you might have flooding issues, and that's right in that curb right of way. And certainly, like I mentioned, the outdoor dining can be part of the economic vitality and placemaking, as well as concepts for waste management, where we put our bins and how they're picked up and so on. So, okay, next slide, please. So just relating this all back to the goals, we certainly see, prioritizing these streets in a safe way, both the intersections and the right of way, how we share the uses there adds to safety and security. It reduces congestion. This is part of how, we're using infrastructure to reconnect communities. This is a place of movement and really improving accessibility so people can get where they need to go. And then making sure that all of our transportation networks and our communities are resilient. So having kind of backup options, different redundancies for people to use. And then really looking for how do we prioritize all users, whether they're, ADA needs or, of different capabilities. And, on the freight level, how do we modernize and incorporate new technologies? And then how do we, just look at, the intersection of property management and the curb management, the public right of way. And this is, we can reduce carbon emissions too, thinking of, dynamic parking pricing so people aren't circling around unnecessarily, creating more carbon emissions, things like that. And a lot of this is, your transit access issues, that first last mile, things that may be on the curb, whether it's a scooter share, a bike share, ways that you can do park and ride using the curb. So there's a lot of different key issues that come into the picture here. So move next slide, please. And yeah, just bring this back to the regional plan. A lot of projects and strategies that are being considered and that have financial costs and considerations. We do have a little, we do, want to highlight some of the opportunities for funding that may be out there that may be of interest. There are these grant programs that we mentioned, but really just talking about, those strategies and actions at the long range or the short range. So yeah, move to next slide, please. And then, yeah, just to, kind of put a finer point defining what this topic is. When we say curb and parking management, we're talking about the regulation of that space, especially on the roadway. We can talk about off-street parking as well. But that space on the roadway adjacent to the curb and sidewalk, controlling who can use this and when, because there can be regulations at different hours of the day, different days of the week. And balance, really trying to find a balance between the needs of different modes, so that you can have the same curb serving parcel delivery, goods movement, pickup, drop off, ADA accessible zones, whatever you need, and finding the demand and the supply balance, and really going through a programmatic planning process where different communities and jurisdictions will have public works departments, different departments that are in charge of different pieces that come into bear here, and updating all those, data systems, those payment systems where that is relevant. And yeah, so a lot of things that we want to, put in this bucket of things called curb and parking management. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so we'll have some poll responses here to go through.
So here we have a question about, do you encounter issues related to curb parking management and access? So an example might be delivery trucks blocking streets, circling or parking for curb access, perhaps double parking. I know that was mentioned earlier. Right, we're starting to see some feedback. Thank you very much. Great, getting good feedback. Okay. Cars and trucks parked at blocking bike lanes. Lack of curb space. Okay, thank you all for your feedback. I'm going to move to the next question. Okay, and we'll have David take over.
Yeah, so, thanks, Stephanie. And we'll kind of intersperse some polling questions about every couple slides as we go through this. So try to have a good balance of content and interaction there and get your feedback. So this slide, and I have a couple more that kind of leverage this kind of flow chart that I have on here and present some different examples and where they find themselves on, and really this spectrum of what I'm calling, you know, kind of the building blocks of curb management and curb data management, especially as one piece of the puzzle. But basically, you know, you can kind of think of your community where you're situated and look at these different pieces and try to think, what of these are going on in your community? And it may not be sequential. They don't necessarily have to like all go, you know, one after the other. Some communities may have a mix and match of these. But, you know, when we talk about curb management, parking management, data management, you know, just kind of the first step is like, is there any sort of regulation program in your community? Is that, you know, a residential permit program where it's, you know, hours regulated for vehicles that aren't resident in that neighborhood? Otherwise, you have a permit that allows you to, you know, park as much as you want. Or is it you know, loading zones, or even just something as simple as you know, handicapped ADA zones? You know, some of those you know, pickup drop off, you know, the 3-minute zones that have become more, you know, during the pandemic and post-pandemic era. We have more of that, you know, picking up, you know, takeout and everything. So just that sort of thing, regulating it doesn't necessarily need to have a paid parking program, but then that would be the next piece. You know, having, whether it's meters, kind of the old school variety, or some of the new technologies that allow you to pay by phone, or have a single kiosk on a given block face. So these are kind of, you know, the first steps into curb and parking management. And then some of those special, you know, kind of use programs, whether it's for commercial vehicles. That's what some cities are focusing on as a subset of loading zones. For those particular permitted, you know, they have a decal for commercial vehicles that get to use that. And then, you know, you may have things like the street cafes and parklets that get special permits. Yeah, a number of things go in here. And then from there, you know, you could look at, well, does your community have any data and awareness of what exists in its jurisdiction? Is there, you know, an inventory of the street signs, the parking signs, or the curb space, and the different color that the curb is painted, things like that? Because then, you know, that's a foundational building block to do different planning and analysis and using different technologies. So you could have data collection where you could have people, you know, with clipboards on the street counting how many cars of different types are staying how long, you know, different trucks and so on. You know, illegal behavior like the double parking. You could have video cameras taking that and that transcribed later. You know, different programs, some new technologies that use AI and machine learning to process that information and create those sort of data sets of what's going on the curb. And then you could have different platforms that serve that information to planning staff at local jurisdictions or to the general public to provide insight into what exists, how it's being used, some of the different programs that a jurisdiction may have, perhaps to reserve spaces for special uses, things like that. And from there, you can get into doing some different things to leverage and you know, kind of dial in the demand based on pricing. You know, how are we changing the pricing based on demand? And yeah, we can look at from there, you know, can we serve this data out to third-party apps that, you know, different, you know, whether it's some of the big name tech companies or other kind of niche, you know, services serving, you know, our local governments and the populace to have information about, you know, availability of parking, the different pricing on different streets, things like that you can kind of send that data out. So, you know, you can kind of think, where do you find yourself, your community, or if you work for a city or an agency along this spectrum? And if you want to go to the next slide. So this is an example from Seattle, where I'm located. I'm working on a project with the Seattle DOT. And within this spectrum, they've really got a lot, some good programming going on, actually some good inventory and data collection, but they're doing more of that. And then what they're really trying to focus in on is, you know, leveraging that and then building, I talked about commercial vehicles. So they're actually doing a digital permit pilot program to use some of the newest technology to allow commercial vehicles to come into an area and basically kind of like a tolling pass, be able to like pay incrementally and passively, you know, do that. So you kind of have complete compliance as well as data that's gathered by the city, so they can right size, well, how many loading zones do we need on this block versus that block based on demand, and make better uses of the supply that is a valuable resource to the community. So move to the next slide. So here's an example from Los Angeles, where Sam and I are working together on the project there. And they don't have this sort of inventory of data. And so you may think, you know, different large cities you may assume are, you know, very advanced in some of these ways. But sometimes, you know, people, you know, different communities find themselves in different places on this. And so just putting together the inventory of what the curb regulations are is a critical component. And so we're working with them on that, and setting up some of those data collection best practices, but they're really focused on enforcement and how do we have more equity in enforcement for different communities, and also improve safety and reducing those conflicts between the different modes there. So some different things going on there. You can move to the next slide, and I have two more examples here, I think. Forward. Yeah, so in New York City, where some of you are, they have a great inventory of their street signs. So you can go on to a public facing website. Some of you may have seen this, and it's a street signs locator tool. You can zoom in and click on a given point location and see what the sign says. So it's a great, you know, if you just want to know, like, oh, can I park here? What's the regulations in the block that I'm going to take a trip to and try to visit this business or visit my friend on this block? You can actually see all that stuff. So that's a great resource. In Washington, D.C., they have something that's kind of similar, but also not. So they have something where they inventory some of their street signs, but it's really for internal public works use, because they had a backlog of work orders needing to go and fix a sign or install a sign, do some sort of adjustment, you know, in the field, and they needed some way to basically make that workflow more efficient for their city staff. And so they've developed different tools there. So you can kind of think of, for different use cases, technology and data can help cities and the populace in different ways. Move to the next slide. So we have some poll questions here now.
Okay, we have a new set of questions now. What programs does your community currently operate? If you don't know, there's always that option as well. You can respond in the chat. Residential permit parking program. Great, we're getting great feedback. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Great, thank you. This is great feedback. So mostly paid parking programs and handicap zones. Excellent. Okay, on to the next question. Here we have a question on your current concerns or priorities for managing curb in your community. Okay, thinking charges should go on private property, not public curbs, accessibility, too much demand, not enough supply. Parking, like nice spots. Deliveries, okay. And we're seeing in the chat, reduce double parking, improving safety and efficiency. Quality of the sidewalk and availability of curb cuts. We will move on. Oh, lack of enforcement. Great. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Now, thoughts on curb management in your community and or the region? Again, an open-ended question. Encourage and meaningful review feedback from local communities. Okay, thank you. More police enforcement. We have a chat question here. Improved curb management is needed. We need to experiment with more strategies and find workable solutions for different curb access challenges. Compliance with rules should be rewarded, not just sticks. Anything to improve pedestrian safety is beneficial. Implementing residential parking permits, more police enforcement. Meaningful review feedback from local communities. Excellent. And I'm going to have my colleague Maya take over the speaking because there's something happening with my audio and I can't seem to fix it. So just bear with us.
So if there are any additional comments, those can continue to go in the chat or also be entered through Poll Everywhere. Here we have, I think that last comment disappeared from the screen sharing, but we do have that saved on the back end. And the next comment is, what do you see are the most important use cases of curb management in your community? So again, feel free to answer in the poll everywhere or to enter those responses into the WebEx chat. And it may take just a second for some of those responses to come through. And if nothing comes up now and someone thinks of something later, that can also go into the chat, but perhaps we move on to the next question. Oh, here we have one. NLZs in New York City. Important post-COVID as 1 in 5 New Yorkers receive a package every week. Great feedback, thank you. We also have a comment in the chat, delivery access, as well as passenger pickup and drop-off space. Here we have controversial. It depends on which part of the community. Those that use transportation alternatives are thrilled to have options. And less vehicular space, more pedestrian space. Great feedback, everyone. Thank you for sending that in the chat and in the Poll Everywhere software. And e-cargo bikes. Definitely something that we see a lot in New York City. I think we'll keep this open for about 10 more seconds and then move on to the next question. Okay, and I think we'll move on to the next question. Or the next slide.
Thanks. Yep. All right. So yeah, we have a couple more slides of content here. I did want to just present some of the trends in the industry. So what we've been seeing across the country is that there is a move towards more use of technology, which can take various forms, right? So you may be most familiar with paying for your parking meter using your phone app now, and there's different apps in different cities and jurisdictions now. But there's also a lot of sensors and video cameras, LiDAR, different things to track just parking events and the demand going on the curb. And a lot of different vendors in the space are putting together different websites and data platforms for cities and planning agencies to explore that data, sometimes for public consumption as well. And so there's just a lot more technology in the space, whether it's direct for consumer benefits or for city planners to work with. And then there's a lot more data coming in, both being collected and then being able to do planning, make planning decisions, on the basis of the data that and the insights that we see from that. There's kind of a specificity of use cases that rather than the curve just being used for kind of everything under kind of some blanket regulations and things, we're really kind of zeroing in on some particular use cases, some which are more prominent in recent years, like street cafes or parcel deliveries becoming much more in demand, right? And like the food delivery is becoming much more of a thing. And then in terms of how we put all this data together, probably as these data sets in curb and parking management were more in their infancy, every different jurisdiction had kind of a different way of collecting that data, managing that data, but there's a move towards trying to get cities and different governments working together to have standard specifications of how that data is collected and stored, so that any kind of tech vendors in the space or third-party apps or different private businesses can draw on like a similar stream of data working in different jurisdictions. And then like I said, just some of the different apps that will allow you to look up where parking is available, whether it's off street in a garage or on the street using some of this data. So move to the next slide, please. So yeah, again, some of the particular use cases in data-driven curb management. So one is just matching the demand and the supply. We all know instances where we've tried to find a place to park and couldn't find a place to park, and other places where there seems like there's tons of places and there's maybe there's too much supply of particular regulated curbs, whether it's loading zones or handicap zones or pickup drop-off activity. All these things are in flux, and the regulations are being changed, and allowing cities and communities to understand ways to match that demand and supply best is one of the use cases. Like I've mentioned before, just reducing the conflicts between modes. So this just means that, when you have, say bike lanes or transit lanes, and you don't want to have that double parking impeding the free flow of that bus or bikes using that bike lane, right? And some of the safety concerns that come with that. And we mentioned we don't want to have drivers circulating unnecessarily, burning more gasoline, more carbon, and their time. Just searching and for a spot. So having the right pricing, so that there are availabilities where people want to be able to park, and kind of spreading out that demand. And then providing information. So you may have delivery drivers. This could be, for some of the gig services. It could be for some of the larger parcel delivery or other commercial fleets. So whether this is FedEx and UPS, or your Postmates and Grubhub, but that those delivery drivers can make their trips more efficient by knowing where loading zones that they can use are, and even maybe real-time occupancy levels if that's available while they're en route. And in some cases, even being able to reserve a spot if they know they need to park for a little bit longer to unload a lot of goods to a business. And then being able to just provide general information to any citizens who maybe are price sensitive, and they want to see is it cheaper to park on this street a few blocks away from my destination, and be able to have that information at their fingertips to plan their own day and their own trips. And just understanding the impacts of all this on from land use types, and one of the early responses in our first questions, right, was like looking at some of the parking maximum regulations, things like that. So that comes into some of the land use issues. But whether you have residences or commercial and retail or mixed uses, and at what densities, whether you have kind of multifamily high-rise dwellings, or whether it's more of a suburban area, all these different factors come into bear of that, knowing what demand is there, and being able to then proactively plan going into the future of what's going to be the demand that's caused by new developments, and how to plan for curb management around that. So go to the next slide, please. I think we have a couple more polls coming off of this.
Great. So now that we've talked about the data and the trends, we have some more questions. So first, what role does data and technology have in curb management in your community? So it seems like right now there's a even split between minimal, some, and significant. And we'll wait for those responses to come in. But again, feel free to leave more specific comments in the chat. Okay, so it seems like most people say that it has some role. Some people say it has less, some say it has more. Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. And let's move on to the next poll question. So the next question is, what roles do you think data and technology should have in curb management in your community? So kind of a visionary question here, looking to the future. Okay, great. So it seems like most people are hoping that the data and technology has a bigger role in the future of curb management. And some people think it has a minimal role. So a nice spread of answers here. Oh, here we have some comments in the chat. Regarding data, there is hard data, but there is a real issue of perception of data. And often the latter is the issue we have to respond to the community on. Great comment. And here we have someone hoping that the data and technology has a significant role, especially if we can solve for enforcement challenges. Really great feedback here. Thank you all. We'll give it a couple more seconds. And again, even after we move on from this slide, if you have more thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next slide.
Thanks, Maya. So this slide, before we go into some more poll questions, just introduces what I was talking about, standardizing the data formats that different cities and communities are using. And so there's this thing called curb data specification, and it's kind of put together and set up by this organization called the Open Mobility Foundation. So that's kind of an industry forum, which a number of cities around the country are members of, and other private sector partners that deal with the curb, and they're working together on trying to create this common data, curb data specification. And it really has three elements. So, it deals with the inventory of the curb and a way to put together, what do you have there? You think of individual parking spaces, but you may have, zones where you have multiple spaces within that of the same regulation. But that may change depending on time of day, depending on day of week. You may have a given zone that has multiple spaces that says, okay, between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. this is paid parking, for anyone to use. But between 4 and 6 p.m. it's a towaway zone because there's higher traffic or higher transit use or what have you. And so it's restricted, different hours in different ways. So you can record all that information within the specification. And you can create areas that aggregate up that for a street, a neighborhood district, and be able to get a sense of how many spaces of different regulations do you have in that neighborhood, and kind of compare that and those policies. And then you have the events specifications. This is really just understanding the behavior, the demand, being able to collect that data of how many vehicles are parking on this curb in a given hour, in a given day, different types of vehicles for different use cases. Are they a general citizen parking? Are they a delivery vehicle? Are they doing a pickup drop off? What have you? Are they doing an illegal parking behavior? What's and then creating some metrics of that summarize that information of is there what's the average dwell time for people parking on that street or in that neighborhood? How many parking events? What is kind of the turnover ratio of people moving in and moving out in terms of parking behavior there, and just getting a sense of the demand activity. And so we can put all that together in a common framework that different cities would have the same data. We can kind of compile all that, look at trends across different jurisdictions, things like that. So if you would move to the next slide.
Great. And here we have a question kind of to that effect about in what circumstances would having better data on these topics help your community? So when you think about your neighborhood, is there a time of day, a type of special event or special circumstances where this data would be especially useful to have? And we'll give it a couple minutes for this response, so people have time to think of those circumstances and then write them out. So here we have, in the planning phase for new curb uses, more data would be helpful. Definitely, and especially helpful as we think about planning for the long range, the long term. The community can see what spaces are and are not available to them. Also really great input. And here we have, regarding curb data specifications, these vary depending upon land use and even time of day. We hope that the MPO report would identify these unique differences. Really great feedback, thank you. And here we have transportation planning, especially in evaluating new strategies for transportation systems and curb management. And then in the poll everywhere, we have variable metered parking during peak and off-peak hours. And regarding curb data specifications, oh yes, again, they vary depending on land use and even time of day. We hope the MPO report would identify these unique differences. And agree with above, at the onset of a project's planning and design phase if it relates to sidewalks and park and rides in public areas. and when they take into consideration neighborhoods going through significant change, such as gentrification. All really great input, and this is all going to inform the curb and parking management specific element of Plan 2055. So thank you all for giving that input. We'll give it about 15 or 20 more seconds, and then we'll move on to the next slide. This is great. Just knowing how many people have cars in New York City and making that data widely known would be a start. And data should help inform enforcement in real time. Really good comment. Thank you all for giving this great feedback. So I think we'll move on to the next slide, but again, keep putting that feedback into the WebEx chat.
Thanks, Maya. So this slide, I just want to introduce some of the new technologies that are entering the curb management space. So, just to start, just think of how you pay for parking. If you're just a, general citizen going to park on a street, in the past, you would have had a meter, you put coins in it. Those have largely gone away. But we've, some places still have kind of meters by individual space. Some places have a kiosk, one per block, where you can still pay with cash, which is still, in many jurisdictions, an important thing to maintain for equity reasons. You can pay with a credit card there and either get a sticker or put in your license plate, makes it, enforcement more efficient, or integrating with a phone app where you can pay, by a phone app. And so that kind of integrates some of that paid parking and allows an easier way to gather data that can be used by planners when it comes in through these integrated means. And then some of the inventory tools. So there's more things going on, whether it's, using AI to process, taking photos of street signs and collecting the information there if there's not an existing inventory data set. There's things that would use that, maybe a video camera mounted on a car or an e-bike rolling by, which can kind of see what assets are on the curb, whether it's the street signs or transit shelters, or the paint that is the curb paint indicating what regulation, all the different things that may be on the curb there, and being able to just process that automatically and create a data set of that. And then in terms of the behavior tracking, there's new things coming out all the time, whether it's sensors that are magnetometers that are placed under the pavement. So as you drive over it, it senses the weight of the vehicle or the metal of the vehicle that is present there. Sometimes it's cameras that can use not just the photo, but that can detect within a certain range from some other technology of whether a vehicle is there, what size of vehicle it is. Also similar with LiDAR technology that may be mounted higher up, above the curb or at person level facing vehicles that may be parking. There's been consideration of using RFID tags similar to toll tags to look at tracking parking or even payment for parking. So a lot of these things that are coming into the field, some of which are more mature than others, some of which have different costs than others. So cities are able to use them at different scales. And so that's kind of I think a way in which the industry is still kind of working things out, and these things are being piloted. And then there's different third-party data sources that are collected by the managers of commercial fleets or some of the gig service platforms from the drivers that are working in those TNCs and gig services. Sometimes it's with connected vehicles, which may be just where these vehicles are going, but sometimes even what they're seeing on the street and kind of mapping out the right of way, as well as some of the driver safety apps, which all of us may have some experience with if we have insurance from different companies that incentivize discounts on our car insurance if we use this app, and then that tracks all that data, and then that can be used for some of the activity going on street by street as well. So yeah, and then there's data platforms that are meant just to ingest all this data and compile it into a common warehouse and create visualizations and tools to explore that information. So yeah, move on to the next slide here.
Okay, great. And we have another question about people's individual communities. So in your community, what technologies are being used for curb management? So again, think about your neighborhood, think about the types of curb management technologies that you're seeing. And then in the chat, we also have regarding the previous comment about stats on and data on vehicle ownership from the New York City DOT. We have stats on the vehicle ownership in New York City available in our mobility report with the link there. We'll be sure to include that on our end in our report keeping. And NYMTC helped us fund the upgraded mobility dashboard via UPWP, and we are now updating the data links. So back to this poll, we have someone who says almost none of those technologies are seen in my community, which is really important to know. That's important feedback. And also we see a lot of people with parking meters and kiosks, pay by phone apps, and curbside electric vehicle chargers. Great, we'll keep this open for a couple more seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for including the details of the other in the chat. That's really great.
Yeah, and if I could maybe just kind of spur the moment ask for some chat feedback, because I think we had discussed maybe having a question particularly on electric vehicle chargers, because I know in a lot of communities that install them on the curb, sometimes there's issues of vandalism and, you know, those cables being cut and then the maintenance issues of that. So it'd be very, good to gather feedback on, you know, how commonly people see some of the vandalism issues with that or other of these technologies going on as well. If people would put that in the chat.
Yeah, another comment in the chat from New York City DOT saying single space meters are being phased out in New York City. Good to know, important feedback. Okay, so we'll keep that conversation going on in the WebEx chat and then maybe move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so let's revisit this topic of modal conflicts. So this is just about ensuring the free flow of all users along the street right of way, whether it's bikes, transit cars, trucks, and how do we reduce the bottlenecks too? So there may be issues where you would have a backlog of many vehicles or even, you know, bikes or you know, different users because somebody is parking illegally, and that can even, you know, impact, you know, blocking an intersection in a red light, right, and impacting cross-cutting traffic and users as well in the worst, you know, instances. So these are things that we want to reduce as much as possible, and yet despite good design and ways that we try to ameliorate and make these as less likely as possible. Some, you know, human behavior still creates these conflicts. So really just, you know, this will be a continuing struggle. I think, you know, we can never, you know, it's hard to stamp it out completely, right? But what we can do is, you know, to use data and understand where demand is, where it's outstripping supply, you know, leading to this illegal behavior. And so to the extent that, you know, these are, you know, if we make the assumption that double parking in the bike lane, you know, or even in the median turn lane are, you know, kind of symptoms of a undersupply of the needed loading zones or other uses, and how can we go in and tweak what regulations are on which street, which block face according to that demand. You know, that's you know, what we have in mind here. And then when we think about, you know, when that's supplied in the right places, that illegal behavior will be reduced. But beyond that, we want to think about pricing too, right? So, you know, to the extent that we can price this dynamically, and that can take different flavors of how frequently we adjust the pricing. You know, in the most extreme case, you know, there's been pilot tests in past years where this was really in real time with sensors in some jurisdictions around the country that would adjust the pricing based on demand, you know, hour by hour. And that's, you know, not very common anymore. Sometimes it's more on an annual basis or on a semi-annual or quarterly basis where looking at demand trends, then those prices can be adjusted, usually within certain ranges, you know, that are set by city councils or other governmental entities that kind of cap how much those can be adjusted, and kind of get some of that stakeholder feedback into that. But ultimately, the ideal that we reduce circulation that can cause congestion itself, and really ensure the equitable use and everybody having a place near their destination, reduce that illegal parking behavior. So that's modal conflicts. Move on to the next slide.
Okay, so on that note, our question for you is how much of a problem are conflicts between modes in your community? And I'll call out one comment in the chat that says, I know I'm banging the same drum, but I've seen Amazon trucks illegally double parked, even when there's a legal parking space literally right next to the truck. So that's a great example right there. I'm sure people have different types of examples to contribute. We also have a comment saying, I don't think demand outstripping supply is an issue to most delivery services. And it seems that people agree that there is either a moderate or major issue with those modal conflicts in the community. Okay, great. And I think we'll move on to the next question. Again, keep putting those examples in the chat. The next question is, how would you rate curbside management overall in your community? And we also have in the chat a conversation about the single space meters being phased out and replaced with pay-by-plate, which is some of that technology that was being mentioned earlier in the presentation. Okay, great. So we have many people saying that curbside management is fair. Seems like a pretty good distribution across these different options. With the consensus or the majority of people seeming to agree that curbside management falls somewhere around the fair area. Okay, we'll leave this up for a couple more seconds. And then move on to the next question in this section. And the question now is, what uses of the curb should be prioritized more than present? And we have a lot of options here, so don't be afraid to scroll. We have another comment that says, curbside management currently is fair. Lots of double parking and parking in areas for buses and cyclists, especially seeing delivery vehicles and FHV double parking. Thank you for that comment. That kind of speaks to the previous two survey questions that we just saw. But great examples coming up in the chat. It seems that a lot of people agree that commercial vehicle loading zones should be prioritized. That's definitely coming up as the most popular issue. Also bike shares and shared mobility stations. And really a good distribution across a lot of these different options. Okay, we'll wait a couple more seconds for the last responses to come in. And in the meantime, again, if you have a specific example, feel free to share that with us in the WebEx chat. And if we're not getting any more survey responses, we can move on to parking enforcement.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so we're getting towards the end here. This is kind of the last content slide I'll have, and then we'll have Sam present kind of the last topic after this little section here. But in parking enforcement, we do want to pay attention to some cities, some jurisdictions are having budget cuts, and that's reducing the staff count and the hours that the staff have to do enforcement, whether that's issuing citations or making sure that everyone's following the regulations. And so now this is we can see patterns for sure in cities that have more or less enforcement, and the resulting people following the regulations or not. There definitely is a cause and effect or correlation at least, and so we do want to see enforcement as much as possible. We realize that under budget constraints, that there's issues there, and it raises the question of, do we want to prioritize the curb as a asset that can generate revenue for the local city or community, and consider the lost revenue when enforcement is not fully staffed. And then we've talked about technology a lot here, and certainly there's opportunities for technology to make that time devoted to enforcement more efficient, so that you can actually do more efficient across more enforcement across time and space in your community with fewer staff and fewer staff hours through the use of technology. So there is kind of a trade-off of investments in that technology, and then a trade-off of how much overall you invest in enforcement to either the efficient use of the curb and just people following the laws and doing what we want them to do, as well as the revenue that can be generated, whether it's from parking fees that people pay in the normal course of things, or citations that are issued and then those fines paid. But this also raises questions of equity, and we know that there can be issues where if you have a program where you're realizing through your data tracking that there's hot spots of illegal parking behavior, so then you want to target your enforcement staff in that area. But does that lend itself to maybe more enforcement in minority communities, equity, lower income communities? It starts to raise some tricky issues, and as well as when we see citations issued in areas where people have less ability to pay, and do we have the same fine levels to all citizens regardless of income, or in order to kind of have the same effectiveness in causing people to follow the laws, maybe we should have an income-based fee structure, so that people of higher income levels pay a higher citation, right? So there's different ways to go about this, and cities and communities are struggling with this, but certainly questions to consider and learn best practices from each other. So I'll say next slide from there and ask you guys some feedback.
Okay, so with that in mind, our next question is, how would you rate parking enforcement in your community? Too lax, too strict, or just right? And we'll wait a couple of moments. It seems so far that people are in agreement that parking enforcement is too lax. So we haven't gotten that Goldilocks parking enforcement just yet. Okay, seems that people are in agreement. So we'll wait a couple more seconds and then we'll move on to the next question. We have a comment. I refuse to opine regarding parking enforcement in New York City. Another one, it's tough to say because we are more suburban and the issues vary by town. Very good point. And the next question, do you think that the curb should be managed to maximize revenue generation for cities, like David just talked about? Okay, we have a split in opinion here, some saying yes, some saying no. So again, feel free to give your reasoning in the chat. And we'll wait a couple more seconds for the last poll responses to come in. I think we can move on to the next section of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Maya and David. So I'm going to be talking about off-street parking. This type of parking covers a vast type of different parking. It can be public or private. It can be paid, unpaid, garage or surface. A lot of times lots located in transit and business district shopping centers. The utilization can vary drastically, not only on time of day, but location on if it's busy or not. Land uses change significantly around it. Additionally, parking in a lot of our, especially suburban areas and even downtowns, take up a significant amount of land and are really important when we're thinking about, is that the best use of that land? Are we getting the best value out of that land? And is it serving the most important need? Additionally, we've seen over time, parking lots have taken on some new technologies. You'll notice there's a couple of pictures here, one of an EV charger, another one of solar panels at a parking garage, and then the last one in the right bottom corner is a parking lot with a bioswale and permeable pavement, allowing for better water retention and improved environmental outcomes. And so we're seeing parking lots evolve over time. And on the next slide, I'm going to highlight kind of that evolution and thinking about how that'll apply to the plan. And then we're going to ask a series of questions about parking lots and garages. So just as a really quick recap, parking lots and garages have been around for a very long time. They started back in the 1920s, likely before that even, but that's when we started seeing more standards come out for them and just the idea of more cars being on the streets. So from 1920 to 1960, we really saw a very standard approach to parking lots. You build a parking lot for as many cars as you think will be there. And you had these very, I wouldn't say strict, but these really good guidelines in terms of trying to understand how many people will be arriving per use and how much parking would be necessary for each use. And they served a purpose. They don't always work well now. And we've seen over time that these types of regulations have changed to better equate themselves to the needs and demands that we're seeing in our more evolved structure as time has gone on, as we've gotten potentially denser, or we've provided additional options that need to be accounted for at each of these parking garages. So over time, we've seen parking minimums reduced, and thinking about how parking maximums could be used. We've seen different innovations with shared use parking. We've seen the introduction of more multimodal options at parking garages. And we've really seen parking garages thought of as a potential benefit to districts, and how do we best align all uses with parking, not just one use per parking stall or one business for each parking lot, thinking about them holistically to best address kind of the synergy that we could get from making sure that we maximize the utilization of parking for different uses, different times of day, and create a stacked kind of idea that each parking stall can be used for more than just one car for one store, and thinking about them as resources that multiple businesses or communities can benefit from at the same time. And so we're seeing this continuously evolve and change over time. And now we feel like we may be into a new era of parking, one that is kind of highlighted by the changes we've seen post-COVID, and thinking about how do we best incorporate some of those other incentives or other values that we saw in the last slide, bioswales, charging, other elements that really think about sustainability and thinking about how do we best make them environmentally sustainable? As we know, car travel itself may not be the most sustainable element of our transportation portfolio. So how do we best either mitigate or plan around that in the future? And parking garages and their overall layout and design are part of that conversation to improve access to different locations, transit, or other needs of the community. thinking about them more than just a car parking spot. It's kind of the evolution of parking as we've seen it in our trends that we've monitored over time. So now in the next slide, we're going to kind of just go over a series of questions to solicit some feedback to best understand how parking lots are utilized within your communities and allow us to create better frameworks to make sure that we're planning for those types of future uses and how you best want to see parking lots used in the future.
Great, thanks, Sam. And we'll spend about 1 minute on each of these next 3 open-ended questions. So the first question is, what challenges have you faced parking in off-street lots in your community?
Some of these can be about either not enough parking. There's some potential safety challenges in parking lots that are empty. There could be opportunities where there's restrictions because of private spaces and you think there should be more dedicated to the public. So thinking through those types of challenges when you're going into lots is what we're thinking about here.
And we have a response here, cost of the private spaces compared with municipal on-street spaces. I've definitely seen that myself. And demand for more dedicated EV spaces. And we have a question coming up about that as well. Speeding and lack of driver awareness, as well as security. And then I'll also call out a comment in the chat saying that managing to maximize revenue generation is not a valid goal. Our goal is for efficiency, safety, and public convenience and accessibility. So interesting to consider, especially side by side this question. And here another comment about security. The next question is, are parking lots generally occupied or vacant in your community? And does that vary by location? So another open-ended question. And we'll wait just a couple more moments for people to give their responses. Just thinking about what your neighborhood parking lots look like. Okay, we may move on if we don't have any responses yet, but of course, as always, feel free to leave that in the chat. Oh, here we have one. Certain areas worse than others. Higher occupancy of park and rides near New York Thruway. And of course, varies by location, day, and events in the area. Generally occupied, but often not dedicated EV, bike, or carpool spots. And here someone says, larger commercial trucks and SUVs do not always fit into decked private garages. Hence, small commercial vehicles such as HVAC operators are forced to park on street. Makes a lot of sense. That is a great comment, especially considering the discussion we've had today. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This is the last open-ended question. Do you think that land could be used for something else? Any specific use or activity you'd like to see with that space? Here we have developers are salivating at the thought of parking lot redevelopment. So we have some different ideas about what we think about what the land could be used for, what other people are thinking, housing, TOD, incorporating more green space and environmentally friendly options like bioswales, permeable pavement. Right, lots of different visions for what that land could be used for. Housing and bike paths. Great, and please keep putting those ideas in the chat. We are nearing the end of the hour, so the last question is, do you want to see EV charging as an option at your local parking lots? Yes. And yes seems to be the most popular, so far the only popular response. Okay, and given that it's 4:30, I think we will That wraps up the end of our questions. And of course, if you all have any questions, please visit the Moving Forward 2055 web portal. You have a chance to learn more about the ongoing projects, see some of the upcoming public forums that we'll be having, and submit your feedback. So again, thank you all so much for providing such insightful feedback today, both through Poll Everywhere and in the chat. If you are here for AICP credit or would like to receive that, you can log in using this login to receive that AICP credit. And we have the link that Stephanie just sent below in the chat. So again, you can take a screenshot of this, you can go to that link. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Adam for a quick closing.
Very quick closing because we're right up against the time. Thank you, Maya, Stephanie, David, Sam, Jerry, the entire team. And thank you to our attendees who gave really great feedback today. Wish you well in your evening and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks when we have our last forum coming up. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a great night.